Hi all, and welcome to the second video of this class. In our previous tutorial, we took our first steps with HTML and we learned a few of the tags mainly related to text, and we also got used to the glitch interface and learned how to use that as a tool. In today's video, we're going to continue our exploration of HTML by looking at links, and we're also going to look a little bit at HTML entities and comments, and lastly we're going to cover HTML containers, which give structure to entire web pages. So I think once we're done with today's video, we should have a pretty solid understanding of HTML, and we should be able to do most things that can be done with HTML. And in the next video, we're going to start looking into styling our web pages. We're going to look at CSS. So let's get straight into it. I have a glitch project here. It's just the default new project for the static website. I'm going to go ahead and rename it as usual into ptn2. And I'm going to do what I did in the previous tutorial as well, where I'm going to remove most of the content because we want to start our web page from scratch. I'm going to remove the script as well and the style. You should do the same thing, the readme and the .m file. And I just left the doctype HTML declaration in there because we're going to need it anyway, and I'm going to start writing our page from scratch. So as you remember, there's the HTML tag, there's the head tag, and there's the body tag. I'm going to give our page a title again, and this is going to be PTN tutorial number 2. And yeah, let's preview our page next to the code. And right now there is nothing. Let's just make sure it works. All right, great. So we're seeing a piece of text. And yeah, as I was mentioning, the first thing we're going to cover are links. And links can be added to a web page by using the A tag. I don't know why it's called A or why it's just one letter. Maybe because links are just so important to the internet that the people who came up with all of these notations thought that A would be something too essential to forget. But yeah, it's just like a regular tag that we were looking at last week. We can write the text of the link inside of the tag. This is a link. And strangely, it doesn't show up as a link, right? Like whenever we browse the web, we usually see the links blue or underlined or in somewhat of a different style. And even if we click on it, nothing happens. And this is where attributes come in, right? We need to tell this link where to take the user whenever it's being clicked. And oh my gosh, too many exclamation points. Let me remove that. And we can tell the link where to send the user by using the href attribute. So we type href equals, and then open and close a pair of quotes. And in here we can type the name of a website. So let's have this link go to, let's just send it to Google for the lack of a better example. So we type the whole URL, https://www.google.com, right? And we already see our link has turned blue. It's now underlined, and whenever we hover over it, the cursor turns into a little hand, right, into a pointer instead of the regular arrow. And whenever I'm just going to open the page in a new window as well. Whenever we click on the link, it is just a link, right? We're used to this kind of behavior. All right, so I'm going to close this. Right, so it's just one attribute that we have to remember so far, href with the websites that we want to point to inside of quotes. Let's say I'm going to open this page again in a new window. Let's say we wanted this link to open in a new tab whenever the user clicks on it, right? So right now it just opens in here. let's make that happen. In order to specify that kind of behavior to the browser, we need to use a second attribute that's called target. So we're going to say target equals. We're going to have again a pair of quotes, right? So the way most attributes work is that you have the name of the attribute followed by an equal sign, and then you have a string, right? Like that's what the thing inside of the quotes is called. And the default, the target for opening a link into a new tab is called _blank. This is just something that you have to memorize. It's easy to find it online if you ever forget what it is. But if we go back to our page and refresh, if we click on the link, we should see it opening inside of a new tab, right? All right, so far so good. We have a functional link. There's a few other things that we can do. We can do with links in general, right? Like sometimes links point to pages on the same website as opposed to the outer internet. Sometimes they're email links. Sometimes they point to a place on the same page as opposed to to a different page on the same website. Let's take a quick look at all of those. One type of link that's sometimes used, I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to place a break in here and create a new one. I'll just copy paste the old one. So I'm going to create an email link. Maybe you've seen some of these online. They're not used super often, but they might be useful to know about. So this is an email link. Give me 1 second, make sure I'm recording. All right, we're good. All right, so for our email link, I'm going to remove the target. And inside of the Href attribute, when telling the link where it should point to, instead of having a website, a URL, we need to start with mail to, and then have a colon, and then type an email address, right? So if we wanted to send an email to myself, we would say mail to cesar.io. Whenever we click on this email link, my default email software is going to open, and well, whenever it opens, it's going to start a new email towards the address specified in the Href attribute. Again, these are not used super often, but they're useful to know about. Let's see. Let's do another link where we point to a different page on the same website, right? However, right now our website only has one single page, index.html. Let's create a new page and let's link to it. In order to create a new page on Glitch, we just go to new file, and we can call it, let's see, page2.html. It's going to open as an empty file. We see our preview is still showing the contents of the index.html file, and that's totally fine. I'm just going to copy the contents of index into page 2 and change the title into ptn page 2 tutorial 2, and the body is just going to be very simple. We'll just have a large text saying this is page number 2. Alright, so even before linking to this page, in order to make sure that the page is working, we should go to our website here in the other tab and change the URL to /page-2.html. Right, so we see the contents of our page here. If we mess up the name, right, like if we accidentally say page 3 instead of page 2, Glitch is just going to tell us that a page with that name doesn't exist, right? So make sure to use the exact same name that you have in the that you've saved the file with, and don't forget the .html extension at the end. Alright, so now that we have created a second page, let's create a link to it. And I'm going to type the link, a this, let's see, go to page 2. We're going to use the href attribute again. Href equals. We could use the same kind of format that we used in the external link, right? So we could say, we could copy our link from here, our link from the address bar of the second tab, right? https ptn2.glitch.me/page2.html. Let's try it out. So if I say go to page 2, it's going to take us to page 2, right? So this totally works. However, since it's a page that belongs to the same website, right? So it's an internal page, an internal link, as opposed to an external one. The better way to do it is by not specifying the whole address, but rather just the path of this page, right? So it's going to be a slash followed by the name of the page, right? And the browser, when interpreting this href attribute, is going to know that it needs to access a file on the existing website, and it's going to look for a page2.html. So let's try that again. I'm going to refresh just to make sure. Go to page 2, and of course we are being taken here. Again, if we misspell our page, we're going to be taken to a place that says not found. All right. Yeah, maybe let's link back from page 2 to this page. So let's create a link in here as well. I'm going to say href equals /index.html, go back. So let's test it. We can go to page 2 and then we can go back. So there we go. We have a website with 2 pages and a very simple navigation between the 2 of them. All right, so this is another type of linking that can be done using the a attribute. I'm going to show you a third type of link, which is linking to a different place within the same page, right? So kind of like a scrolling link. These ones are used definitely less often than the previous links that we've seen, but sometimes it's useful in order to help users sort of navigate a certain page, right? If, for example, you have a table of contents at the beginning of the page and then a lot of content for each one of the chapters, you can use these internal links for the same page in order to help the user easily navigate between things. In order to do that, I'm going to need to create sort of a longer page in order for the scrolling to work, because if the entire page fits within one screen, then there is no navigation to be done. And I can do that by maybe adding a bunch of really large pieces of text. This is text number 1. And I'm just going to copy and paste this over a bunch of times, maybe with a few line breaks afterwards. And maybe also a horizontal rule that we covered last time. All right, so let's just copy and paste this a few times over. And again, this is just for the sake of having a page that scrolls, right? I'm going to change the text for each one of them, number them. Okay, we have exactly 9. That's great. The page is scrollable. All right, great. So let's add a link to the very top of our page that would send the user all the way down to text 9. I'm going to add it after the go to page 2 link. Let's insert a line break and create a new link. Go to text number 9. All right, so inside of our href attribute, we need a way of telling the browser to go to this specific element, right? To this h1 element, which is text 9. In order to do that, we can use yet another attribute called the ID attribute. Right, so on a high level, what we're going to do is give this h1 tag an attribute, an ID, and then tell this href attribute of the link to use that ID for navigation. That looks like this. We're just going to say ID equals, we're going to open and close our quotes as usual, and I'm just going to call it text-9. Within these IDs, you can use letters, you can use numbers, you can use dashes, you can probably use a few other characters, but most of the time, letters, numbers, and dashes are going to be enough to have an ID. Don't use spaces, don't use new lines, try to keep them compact. All right, and in order to tell the browser that this is a link on the same page, that it's linking to an ID, we need to start the href with the hashtag, and then the name of the ID, which is text-9. And let's go to our page and make sure that it works. So whenever I click to go to text-9, we see that our page scrolled all the way down, right? If I change if we created a new link, that would be go to text4. Right, so I'm changing the text, I'm changing the href attribute, and we also need to give the text4 an ID. ID equals text-4. Whenever I click to go to text4, we see that the text4 scrolls to the top of the page. Text-9 doesn't scroll to the top of the page because there is nothing below it to scroll further. Yeah, so these are called anchors, right? Anchors within a page. Let's create one last anchor to send the user back to the top of the page if they've arrived at the end, right? So have like a little back to top over there. We can use the small tag. I really like the tiny text, and let's just say back to top. Right, so we're going to create a link inside of the small tag, and we need to give it an href, which points to an ID at the very top. We could use this "it works" text as the top anchor, right? So we can create a paragraph out of it. Give it an ID. ID equals top of the page. And inside of the href for back to top, we would say hashtag top of the page. Right, so let's test it, and then let's discuss a little bit further what we just did. Right, so let's go to text4, that still works. Let's go to text9, and now let's go back to top. Right, so this is going to scroll into view the "it works" paragraph. A few things that we just did. You notice that I just nested a link inside of a small tag, right? That's totally possible. This is one way to give links a different typography, right? So instead of a small tag, it could be an H2, for example. And then if we go back to our page, we see that the typography changed for back to top. The other thing that I did was that I enclosed this the originally free-floating text. It works inside of a p tag in order to be able to give it an ID. Right, and that's one important thing to remember. If you just have text floating around in HTML, it's impossible to give it attributes. However, the moment it becomes part of a tag, you get all of these nice things that come with attributes, and we're going to be digging deeper into the HTML attributes over the next few weeks. All right, I think that's all that I wanted to show in terms of links. Let's see what's next. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about HTML entities. And this is a very small subject. It's not something that's used super frequently, but again, it's useful to be aware of. As you see, within HTML, there are a few kind of reserved characters that are part of the tags, right? So we have the opening tag, right, like the lower than sign. We have part of the closing tag, or like the closing of the tag. We have the slashes, right? So if we wanted to say the number 2 is lower than the number 4, we would get a compilation error, right? Glitch complains because HTML would believe that this is the beginning of a tag. So glitch actually tells us that like what to do in order to fix this problem. It tells us that special characters must be escaped, right? So lower than is a special character. The way we escape these special characters is by using special HTML codes that would render that character without us having to type it. The way they work is usually you start with an and sign, the ampersand, the code of the character, which for the lower than sign is LT, and then a comma. Right, so we see the syntax highlighting, turning it green, and we see it in our page. We see the lower than sign being rendered. The same thing works for the other way around. For the greater than sign, it's in GT instead of LT. Let's have some line breaks here, maybe after this one too. All right, so these are two of the HTML entities. The end, right? So you see the end is part of the entity. If we wanted to have number 4 and number 2, this works. However, sometimes you need to, oh, that seems to work as well. If you need to escape the end character for any reason, the HTML entity code for that is and AMP semicolon. AMP stands for ampersand. These are super hard to remember, so you can always just Google HTML entities and, oh, maybe this isn't the best example. Yeah, this one, character entity reference chart, right? So this one tells us what the code would be for pretty much any kind of special character that we want, right? So let's try this beautiful R that looks like a tsu. Right, so I'm going to bring the code in here and say this is an R that looks like a tsu. Right, so we see it rendered over there. All right, cool. I think that's it for the HTML entities. Oh no, there is one more actually. There is one more that I wanted to show us. Let's introduce some line breaks in here as well. Let's say that we wanted to introduce a bunch of spaces after this R, right? So right now we have one space between each one of the words. We see the same thing inside of HTML. Maybe you've already realized this yourself when playing with, when doing the first homework or when playing with HTML. No matter how many spaces we add inside of the codes, the page will still only show one space. Right, so HTML is kind of ignoring, it's like using the spaces as delimiters between words, but it's not considering more spaces at the same time. If we wanted to introduce more spaces, there is one entity that's called NBSP. Right, I think it stands for non-breaking space, the non-breaking meaning that it doesn't send the text to a new line. right? So we see already that we're having a little bit more space after the R. If we copied this over a few times, we see that the space increases, right? So like each one of these NBSP stands as one space, as hitting the space bar once. All right, I think we're really done with the entities now. Great, great, great. And yeah, two more things that we're going to cover in this tutorial. The first one are comments, and you're probably used to comments from C++ or from whatever other programming language you've studied in school before. They're just a way to write something inside of our code for ourselves or for other humans who are reading the code that doesn't get interpreted by the browser, right? Or that doesn't show up in the page. The way to do comments in HTML is, the syntax is a little weird, but it's easy to remember. It's the lower than sign, exclamation mark, dash dash to open it, right? So we see all of our page disappeared because we haven't closed our comment tag, right? So glitch and the browser believes that the whole page is a comment. We'll just say this is a comment, and the closing one is dash dash greater than sign, right? So if our page looks exactly the same, however, the code has a comment embedded inside of it, right? Which is the same here. Maybe you've done this before, maybe you haven't, but if you go in your browser to view developer and view source, this is a way to check out the HTML for like really any page of the internet, right? So here we can see that the comment is showing up in the code, and we can see pretty much all of the code that we wrote earlier, right? And like this works. I don't know why nsa.gov is showing up as my first link. That's kind of funny. Right, so this kind of thing works on any page, and that's a crazy script right there, right? So we see a lot of code that's just like garbled together. However, some pages have more legible HTML. And then also some people like to use comments as kind of a playful thing within their website. So if we look at the source of this website, we see small illustrations or various other things, right? Or like comments just for remembering what each one of the section is. All right, so yeah, keep the comments in mind. They're useful for your own reference, or once you start working in teams with other developers, it's useful to sort of communicate within the code itself. Cool. And for the last thing we're going to cover in this tutorial, we're going to talk a little bit about containers and the structure of HTML. As you've probably seen so far, every time we use a tag like h1 or h2 or really any of the h's, the text goes on a new line, right? So let me just go to the beginning of this document and have an h1 saying this is the first heading, right? So the text kind of occupies its entire line, also has some spacing underneath. The same happens for a paragraph. Right? However, if we just write text by itself, as we did earlier, right? Like if we don't have a line break between two pieces of text, they're going to show up on the same line. And this is kind of hard to wrap your mind around in the beginning. Like, why do some elements give a new line and why do others don't? Why do others not? And that's because there are two types of elements in terms of in terms of structure, in terms of the flow of HTML. There are block level elements, right, which are h1, paragraph, and others that sort of get their new line and occupy the whole horizontal space that they get. And then there are inline level elements, the text without a tag being an inline level element, which sort of continue on the same line that was already started. And the easiest way to exemplify this is by using two new HTML tags. The first one is the div tag, and this is probably the one HTML tag you're going to be using the most. And then the span tag. And we're going to talk about what both of these mean. As you can see, I've added both the div and the span tag. However, the page hasn't really changed, right? And this is because both of these tags are container tags. They're not meant to display anything themselves. They're just meant to use as structural elements in order to organize our page, in order to organize our information. So let's write a piece of text in here. All right, so if we write something else afterwards, we'll notice that the text that's placed inside of the div container gets its own line, right? So that means that the div is a block level element. It's going to come in really handy even in our next video as we start working with CSS and with styles, right? So yeah, these types of containers become really useful when it comes to the attributes that you can give them and when it comes to styling elements. In terms of the span element, it's equivalent to the div, except for the fact that it's an inline level element. So I'll just type this will be on the same line. Right, so we see the text showing up on the same line as the previous one. And just to give you kind of a preview of what our next tutorial is going to be like and like how these div and span elements can be used, let's make this text red, right? Like let's change the style of just this one piece of content. So I'm just going to say span style equals, and then open and close our quotes, right? So style is another attribute that can be used on any HTML element. And I'm just going to say color, colon, red, and then semicolon at the end. Right, so we see our text turned red. Right, so these like div and span, these structural elements can be used to attribute styles to various elements inside of HTML. If we wanted this whole text to be red and this word to be, for example, blue, we would enclose it inside of its own span element and give it a color from there, right? So I'm going to say span and put the closing afterwards. And then say again style equals color blue. Right, so we have a red sentence with a blue word all on the same line using span elements. All right, I think that's it for this tutorial. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions around any of this stuff. I know it's a little bit challenging in the beginning with understanding what all of these new tags are doing, but I think as we move along with our assignments and as you start using them more and more, they're going to become pretty self-explanatory. All right,